Hello writers, come write with me. My name is Mykela Greenwood. I create worlds for mind adventures. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Write with Mykela. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell so we can go on this journey together. You can come on the journey with me. Today is story time, or the day of our chapter exchange. I am hoping to continue to get chapters from you. Don't leave us hanging. If you've already sent, say, chapters 1 through 3 or 1 through 10, I'm releasing 2 videos on some Tuesdays to read your writing from your writing prompts, and 2 videos on some Fridays to read your chapters for those of you where I have permission to read them on the channel. So basically your work will be extra videos, but everything else will be the same for my viewers. If you're writing with me and you wish to exchange chapters, then I need written permission to read your chapter on the channel, as I have discussed before. Writers may send their chapters in PDF or Word document format to writewithmykela@gmail.com. Write is spelled W-R-I-T-E, and Mykela is spelled M-Y-K-E-L-A. And the email address will be posted at the end of the video. Please do not send Google Docs. I'm not making any promises to read every chapter sent to me on the channel, but I intend to read all the chapters sent. All chapters read on Fridays, whether they are mine or another writer's work, are copyright protected material, and no one may use any part in writing their own stories. I want to remind everyone that the story is at least PG-13, meaning if you're under 13 years of age, you need parental guidance. This story is in its rough draft stage, as we've already heard some mistakes. The title of the story is City of the Ancients, and today we are reading chapter 20. One viewer wanted to know if they could have something to read along with as I read. So if that's something you would like, then email me and ask for the chapter. I will create a PDF of the chapter. The PDF, once created, won't receive any edits, and it may or may not match exactly what I read on the channel, but that's what I can offer. Let's start. Chapter 20, City of the Ancients. In the morning, none of them felt rested, but they ate breakfast and headed out once again. At mid-afternoon, Kirsha felt her orb beneath her dress. It was lighting up. She pulled the orb out, and the purple light spilt in every direction, and then it pointed north. Kirsha glanced to Kirian and noticed he was pulling his orb out of his pocket, and the orb was spraying orange light in all directions. Kirsha then looked at Kilty and saw the red light of her orb. Kirsha, started Mr. Volans, I think I saw something moving beyond those trees. Kirsha took the stone staff and quickly placed it in the ground where she felt the orbs were directing her, and the siblings took their places according to the map and to where their orbs were showing them. The lights connected to each other and to the stone staff, and then Kirsha felt majority. Suddenly, dissenters surrounded them on all sides, with a massive number of dissenters coming very fast for them through the dense trees. Mr. Volans huddled between them and the stone staff. He was very scared, and he just knew he was going to die. Commander Rivas was not at the gate, but many ancients were. Commander Rivas knew Farsnile would soon emerge from him, and he knew his job. He touched the sphere and said to the siblings, "You have to restore our city. The city will replace the inner forest, and then we will help you." Then he turned to the people around himself. "My troops, go to the gate. The rest of you that have a dissenter returning, we must protect the city and fight these dissenters once and for all." Kirsha heard Commander Rivas, and she felt that Kirian and Kilty did too. She glanced around. She didn't know how to restore the ultrarium, and the dissenters were descending on them. She quickly did a spell to place a stone cage around her and the siblings. Around her siblings, her, and Mr. Valens. The word for stone just popped in her head. Then Kirsten started hearing words on the wind, and she recognized them, so she said them aloud. Kirian glanced over to Kirsten after he looked at the stone bubble that protected him. The stone bubble relieved him. He was glad that the dissenters were not slashing him, and the words called him, so he repeated them. Kilty could hear the dissenters banging against the stone. She remembered her clay bubble over the wagon, and she remembered the dissenters breaking in. She too started saying the words as she hoped perhaps Kirsten was giving them a stronger spell. At points while they were saying the spell, the stone looked clear, and they could see dissenters beyond, but they saw other things too. Buildings and streets started replacing the trees, but then they would fade, and the trees would be there once more. And then inside the stone bubble, the stone staff expanded, and people started coming out. Kirsten heard Commander Rivas in her mind. "Those are my troops. They will be at the edge of the bubble so you can drop it." Kirsten didn't like the idea, so the first thing she did was expand the bubble just as she had seen the stone staff do. Kirsten then thought to Commander Rivas, "Is the ultrarium restored?" "No, that is the door. The whole city must be in place for you to restore it. The spell you said just opened the door." Kirsten was able to say a fire spell to rain down the sides of the stone bubble before she dropped the bubble. She didn't want to forsake the troops, but they needed the whole city. She didn't know how the troops were able to leave the city, but she didn't think on it long. She put up another bubble and continued repeating the words she heard on the wind. Another set of troops was inside the bubble, and Kirsten didn't want to unintentionally hurt the troops already out, so she didn't use fire again. This time when she dropped the stone bubble, she saw more streets and buildings, and they looked solid, but she also saw some trees. She didn't look on at the fight too much because she knew she wanted to help, but she and Kirian and Kilty needed to finish the spell. Kirsten was about to say the spell for the stone bubble when it appeared before her. She glanced over at Kirian and he winked at her. "I'm catching up," stated Kirian. "I'll do it next," said Kilty excitedly. "No," replied Kirsten. "We have to bring the whole city back." Then Kirsten started saying the words to the spell. Suddenly she didn't need to hear the words on the wind. She just knew them. The troops were fighting the dissenters. Dissenters slashed them, and the ancient troops used their magic much the same as what Kirian and Kirsten had done against the 22 dissenters they had killed. Finally, the siblings restored the city, and Kirian dropped the stone bubble. The incredible use of magic exhausted the siblings, and Kilty fell over. Both Kirsten and Kirian caught her since she was between them. Orisha rushed to them. "I have the medicine." Hopefully she didn't fully exhaust herself. Kirian and Kirsten wanted to apply the medicine to Kilty, but there was fighting everywhere. Kirsten enclosed her mother, Kilty, and Mr. Valens in a stone bubble and turned to the battle. Then Kirsten saw a dissenter and knew instantly that it was Mayorti. Her fear spiked up. Kirian glanced over at Kirsten. He knew something was wrong because he felt her fear. "Son," said Arik as he walked up beside him, "you have to pay attention to your battle first." "Kirsten is scared," stated Kirian. "I think she feels Mayorti," responded Arik. Then he turned back to burning dissenters, and although he was more proficient with water than fire, he did a good job. Kirsten put a stone cage around Mayorti, but it was a cage with bars and not solid. Kirsten once again pulled out the gems and slung them. The gems shot into many dissenters, and one went into Mayorti. Kirsten pulled out the spears and shot them. She shot them using her magic, so none went into an ancient. Mykela was on fire, but he stayed calm and chastised Kirsha and told her what a weak little girl she was. Then Kirsha noticed 3 dissenters descending on Apont. She recognized her grandfather right away and sent a wave of fire to wash the dissenters away from him. Apont turned back. "Thanks," he said, and then he started fighting again. Then a dissenter rushed Kirsha and knocked her back. As Kirsha was falling back, her orb reacted. It shot purple light up from her chest into the dissenter. The dissenter howled in pain, but then it collapsed. That's when Kirsha remembered her plan. She saw the essence rise out of the dissenter, and she sent her fire to consume it. Then she turned to Mykela and yelled, "You wanted to inhabit me? Well, now's your chance." Many people momentarily stopped and glanced at Kirsha, but Kirsha watched Mykela. Kirsha saw what she wanted to see. The essence of Mykela rose up out of his lizard body. Not all of his essence, but enough to send to Kirsha to enter her. Kirsha saw it, and she knew it was not all. So she magically pulled the rest of his essence out of him. She magically had the 2 sets of his essence merge, and then she threw fire at the essence. Mykela collapsed in his cage. Many ancients were engaged in battle, and the dissenters had hurt many of them, but those around Kirsha diverted some of their attention to what she was doing. Hasherman was near the sphere. "That's it," he called. "That is what you need to do." Commander Rivas and many around him were also engaged in a battle with a dissenter that had inhabited them and had emerged from them. The siblings had restored the city, and these with Commander Rivas could get to the rest of the ancients that were also in battle, but they stayed at the sphere to watch Kirsha. Commander Rivas had seen something, but he wasn't sure what it was. "I heard the words," shouted Hasserman. He shouted the words he heard, and the ancients repeated them as they fought dissenters with their swords and as the dissenters used their long claws. Many of these ancients had been in battle recently and had not fully recovered, but they fought their hardest now. They weren't sure the meaning of the words, but then a dissenter fighting an ancient just collapsed to the ground. Harshaman was motioning to the essence that emerged and was shouting to fire it, but the ancient couldn't see it. Harshaman looked nervously at the sphere. He placed his hand on it and shouted, "I need the words to the fire spell now. I have essences coming for me." Kirsha glanced over her shoulder at the voice that was in her head. She said the words aloud because she was casting another fire spell anyways. She glanced around. There was blood all over the street. Many ancients looked dead or severely injured. Then she heard Mr. Vallens scream out. Kirsha and Kirian both turned and saw the dissenters had crumbled the stone bubble. Then fire shot forth from the bubble, and the bubble reformed. Only the bubble was not stone. It was wood. Kirian put another stone bubble over the wooden one, but while casting the spell distracted him, many dissenters rushed him. He screamed out in pain as their claws ripped his flesh. Arik immediately aided, but he was getting overwhelmed. Kirsha turned to the mob against Kirian and Arik, and she once again set her spell to pull the essences from them. A large ball of essence was flying fast in the air towards Kirsha, so she didn't see the dissenters collapse. She focused on her fire spell. Kirian and Arik were able to handle the dissenters left. When the merged essences caught fire, time stood still for several minutes, and everyone turned to look at the huge fire burning in midair. Many were unsure of what it was. Even most dissenters didn't know that the fire burned essences of their kind. Hashaman repeated this new spell on several dissenters around him that were fighting ancients. Several dissenters collapsed to the ground. This distracted other dissenters near, and they turned their focus on Hashaman. Hashaman focused on catching the essences on fire and didn't see the dissenters start to head towards him. But Commander Rivas noticed right away. Commander Rivas gave out commands and signals to those around him. One near Hashaman, who no longer had a dissenter to fight, put a wall of fire around Hashaman and the spear. When Hashaman saw the fire around him, he looked up and around. He noticed that the dissenters were a lot closer to him than they had been. So even though his fire on the essences had not gone out, he started the spell again to call the essences out of the closest dissenters. This time, Commander Rivas was more aware of what was going on, and then suddenly he saw the essence of several dissenters flying towards Hashaman. So he said the fire spell. Wind was more his specialty, but the whole city had been studying the spells for fire. "Thanks!" shouted Hashaman. Then he saw another ancient say a fire spell over the rest of the essences coming for him. So he said the spell to pull the essences out of more dissenters. Thus they started working together, and once the dissenters around them were dead and had a sword through their neck for good measure, then Commander Rivas' group, including Hashaman, went towards the gate to help with the battle. Kirsha was doing the spell over and over of pulling out the essences from dissenters, and she was casting the essences on fire. Then suddenly she turned to the stone bubble, which the dissenters had mostly broken at the moment. She touched her orb and thought, "Mom, what did you say about Kilty exhausting herself? How do you know? What causes it?" A Pont was near her, and he said, "You're not supposed to stop in the middle of battle." Kirsha turned to a Pont and said, "I have questions. Mom says she hoped Kilty didn't exhaust herself. What does that mean?" A Pont motioned to some dissenters. Then versed, "We've never fought so many at once. I'm sure I didn't know there were that many." Kirsha focused on the dissenters her grandfather had motioned to. She said the words to her spell out loud so her grandfather could hear. Then suddenly a wish ran through her mind, and her orb instantly granted it. She wanted her grandfather to see the essences rise up out of the dissenter's body, so her orb sprayed purple light onto the essences. A Pont and several others took an involuntary step back as they saw the essences rise. Then they sucked in their breath as they saw the essences quickly fly towards Kirsha. Both a Pont and Kirsha said their fire spells on the purple essences flying towards them. The essences erupted in a big ball of fire. Several dissenters at the edge of fighting decided they had seen enough. So they took off running through the city in the hopes of finding an exit. A Pont turned to Kirsha and studied her for a few minutes. Exhaustion is... He turned back to what he just saw. Well, we believed it was when our essence has used too much magic or more magic than it left in the body. He motioned to the scene, although all of the color and fire were gone. He turned back to Kirsha. But maybe our theory is wrong about that. Still, the body doesn't reawaken if a person pushes it to exhaustion. Kirsha looked over to the crumbled stone bubble, but the wooden bubble within still stood. She looked around at the battle. The dead lay everywhere, ancients and dissenters. Dissenters were running away, and ancients were pursuing them. Everything seemed handled at the moment. So Kirsha said, "I have to know." She took off toward the wooden bubble. Kirsha magically undid the wooden bubble without thinking about it and without thinking about the cup lesson so long ago that Mr. Volkov had her do. When she saw her mother cradling Kilty's body and rocking, she stopped dead still. Kirian had noticed Kirsha running towards the bubble, and he too had headed that way. He too stopped cold when he saw Kirsha stopped. He looked to where the bubble had been. He was ready to curse in every manner possible. What point was it to try to bring Kilty to her cure if she was going to die getting there? Apont walked past Kirsha. He let his hand pat her shoulder as he passed, and he said softly, "You'll never learn anything all the way over here." Kirsha once again started running to Kilty. Kirian, too, started sprinting over. Once Kirsha arrived, she stopped, and she couldn't bring herself to ask the question. When Kirian arrived, he reached out for Kirsha's hand. Apont once again caught up to them. He put one hand on Kirsha's shoulder and one hand on Kirian's. He slightly leaned between them and asked, "Arisha, what is the news?" Arisha looked up. "I'm not sure. I think she is too weak a magic user to exhaust herself. And I did get the medicine to drip down her throat, but I've gotten no response." Arik walked up. "But I see her chest rising and falling. That's a response." Kirsha turned to Apont. "Hold your magic in yourself." Then she sent some of her magic in Apont. Her mother, father, and Kirian wanted to know what she was doing, but they didn't know what to say. Apont was not sure how to hold his magic within himself, especially once he felt Kirsha's magic enter. "I can't tell the magics apart," he said. "I can see mine," stated Kirsha. "She pulled some out, but left some. Now give me your theories." Apont placed his hands on his chest. "You didn't take all yours back." "I didn't want to take too much," stated Kirsha. Apont motioned to Kilty. "Give her some. I felt better. I still feel better than before you gave. Maybe it will help." Kirsha glanced to Kirian, and he slightly nodded his head. Then Kirsha sent some magic into Kilty. Everyone held their breath, but Kilty didn't awaken. After a few minutes, Apont said, "It is helping her. I am sure of it. We may never know how much, but don't send more. Too much might be as bad as too little or none." They worked at getting Kilty to their parents' home, but halfway there, the ancients needed them to help in the fighting, especially since the dissenters had feigned running away. They had regrouped and attacked. Some attacked scientists in their homes, but also only Kirsha knew how to pull the life essences out of the dissenters. Hashima knew the spell, but he wasn't so proficient to pull out all the life essences. Kirsha wanted to stay by Kilty's side, but her mother promised her to communicate through their orbs if there was a change. If there was any change. As they fought, Kirsha used telepathy with Kirian to warn him of dangers behind him, but then she warned others that she didn't know. She just tried the telepathy without thinking about what she was doing, and it worked. The ancients would respond with thanks, also using telepathy, and they too didn't think about using it. Several times the ancients thought all the dissenters were dead, only for a group to come out of hiding and attack again. Finally, all was quiet and still. The ancients stood in place and looked around. None of them dared to drop their guard just yet, especially since that is how many ancients had died. Kirsha sent out her senses and tried to feel any more dissenters. She felt ancients and more ancients, but no dissenters. Still, she too didn't want to let her guard down. Every time had been a waiting game. Kirsha sent out a thought. Invisible stone bubble. Prepare a lethal spell, and then sit down in your bubble. Strike only once they're really close. Kirsha followed her own instructions, and those near enough to her saw her sit down. The rest of the ancients glanced at each other, and then a few more did as Kirsha and a few more. Once most of the ancients were sitting on the ground, and a few thought they could finally drop their guard. But an extremely large group of dissenters rushed them. Many wanted to stand up, but the dissenters were too fast, so they just unleashed the spell they had ready. Hashaman had been near Kirsha, and he didn't have a lethal spell. He just had a fire spell. But his invisible stone bubble protected him, and soon Kirsha sent her lethal spell into the dissenters around him as well. Kirsha didn't bother trying to stand up. Her bubble protected her. In fact, it protected her so well that a few dissenters broke their claws against it. The ancients were losing their fear of the last blow being magical, and they used only their magic in this last battle. Apont had not sat down, but he still had a bubble. Then after a time, he could see the life essences. He saw the ancients' essences as they released their spells. He realized that they used as they released their spells, and he saw the dissenters' essences as they too released their spells. He realized that they, the dissenters, used magic to enhance every physical blow. He thought that was one thing that made them so scary. People thought the dissenters were just strong, but they wouldn't be as strong without their magic. Once again, the battle died down. Many dissenters lay dead on the ground around them. Their life essences had burned when they sent them out to inhabit an ancient. But the ancients stayed in their bubble and waited. Finally, Commander Rivas motioned to his troops. They were going to search every inch of the city and bring back word. The ancients waited, and night approached. It was fully dark outside before Commander Rivas and his troops returned. Commander Rivas headed to Kirsha, but he stopped short when he saw all the bubbles were glowing with color. Now there was no question that the bubbles were there. Commander Rivas headed to Kirsha and gave his report. The ancients were tired, so they would celebrate the return of their city tomorrow. When Kirsha and Kirian arrived at their parents' home, there was no change in Kilty. Their parents showed them to their room where they retired for the night. Kirsha was very restless, so Kirian tried his best to help her relax, because he intrinsically knew that worrying would not help them or Kilty. A week had gone by. The ancients had their celebration, and many ancients showed Kirsha and Kirian around the city. The strange thing for Kirsha was that all the creatures of the forest were in the city. They were just easier to spot. Kirsha had communicated with Bonnie and learned that Mr. Leister was no longer acting strangely. The ancients started calling Kirian and Kirsha king and queen right away. But Kirsha said it wasn't right. She told the people that she needed to learn more about them before she could be queen. The people knew it was more an honorary title anyway, but they didn't argue. Finally, when Kirsha was going around the city and the ancients were showing her more things, she received, "Where am I?" She knew immediately that it was Kilty, so she said her goodbyes and rushed to her parents' home. Kilty was indeed awake, and her wound had completely healed. Kirsha and Kirian were very glad. Kirsha hugged Kirian, and he lifted her up and swung her around. Soon Kirsha summoned Amy, and Amy showed Kilty everything she did. There were still a lot of things to do. The ancients had to decide how much they wanted to interact with the humans, and they had to decide if they were going to look to find any more dissenters or even more ancients. But mostly the scientists just went back to their research. Kirsha and Kirian thought that they should probably at least invite some of the humans from their village to the city, but they didn't plan that yet. They were just glad that Kilty had her cure. Then Mr. Volans came to Kirsha and Kirian, and he held up a book. "You won't believe what I read." He opened the book and read, "We were warned about the dangers of our technology, and we were told to join our parents in their city, but we didn't want to be..." He looked up. "Hang on, I have to translate some of this. We didn't want to be trapped. We left our parents on..." I'm not sure I can translate this. Vashinaron? He looked up. It might be a planet. Anyway, we left our parents on Vashinaron and flew away to find our new home. Our spaceship crashed on an unknown planet, and it was too damaged to get to fly again. We were thankful we were all okay. We started out doing what we had done before, but I'm afraid we made our parents' mistakes. And we now need to close our city that we have built. Kirsha glanced around to those around here. "Does that mean there's another ultrararium out there somewhere?" Kirian added, "And we have to fly a spaceship to get there?" Kilty cheered. "I want to go! I want to go! Maybe I have a great-great-great-grandfather!" She turned to Apone. "No offense, your stories are great." A few people chuckled at Kilty's enthusiasm, but then they started thinking about the possibility of more ancients and what really they should do. Finally, Kirsha said, "Mr. Volans, we need more information. We need to know if we can restore the parents' city. We need to know how to build a spaceship. We need to know where this planet is. We need to know the lineage. Maybe we can at least establish telepathy links." So for now, Mr. Volans went back to reading, and they continued with normal daily life. Okay, writers, that is the end of chapter 20 and the end of the story. The fight in the City of the Ancients was our climax, and Kilty's cure was part of the epilogue. The other part of the epilogue was the discovery Mr. Volans made. So I could come up with another plot and write another story. I have a friend that really likes to read stories with characters she's already met. I've said over and over, this is a rough draft. This is the basic plot. I still have details and action to add, and I will do that way before I think about a book 2. Right now, a book 2 is not in the works. Leave a comment below on how far you are in your story. Don't forget to ask questions if you feel stuck. Now, this is the end of season 1, but join me Tuesday to start season 2. We will have another writing prompt or some more jargon. I think I decided to do allegory and archetype. I mentioned them a few Tuesdays ago when we were talking about personification, hyperbole. So it was just another tool to use. Join me Friday for plot 2. Now, this won't be the plot 2 I shared with my children during our summer writings, because they didn't like that one. But this will be plot 2 for the channel. I have a story I call Tahia, and I will pull out a bare bones plot so you can write with me on this one as well. If you send chapters for plot 1, then I will still label those videos season 1. Let's say I start getting chapters from someone called Mike. If he is the first one to send me his story, then I will label his chapter 1 as season 1, episode 4.01. Since episode 4 is where I read my chapter 1. Then if, say, someone named Judy sends in her story, I will label her chapter 1 as season 1, episode 4.02. That way my viewers will know that 0.01 is Mike's story and 0.02 is Judy's story. At least those are my thoughts for now. And of course, all the even numbers after 4 would be the story, 4, 6, 8. So, those are my thoughts. Leave a comment below on if that makes sense to you or if it's totally confusing. If you're ascending chapters, do not think for a minute that your story needs 20 chapters. Your story might have 10 chapters or 40 chapters or any other number. I don't think there is a set number. It just is based on many climaxes or high points of the story. Your story needs to complete something or accomplish something, and your chapter has like a little mini thing. We talked about, the test in a school, like you have a week test. Well, after you do a week of learning in school, you have a test. Well, in life, you do a week or whatever. It may not be a week. You do some learning, and then you have kind of a test of your knowledge, or you have to apply your knowledge to something. So those are like mini climaxes, and these stories, although they have action and stuff, they follow that kind of same pattern of having smaller climaxes, and then the weekly test builds to the 6 weeks test, and the 6 weeks test builds to the, to the mid-semester thing. So your chapters are doing that same kind of thing. Whatever's in this chapter is building to the main climax, but there's still something in that chapter that is completes something, accomplishes something, or moves your story forward. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and the bell so we can continue to write together. Send your latest chapter as a PDF or Word document to WritewithMykela@gmail.com. Or if you haven't sent any chapters, then send your chapter 1. You don't have to polish it or perfect it or have everything connected at this point. This is just fun stuff. We're having fun. We're learning. It's not a competition. It's not a criticism thing. Visit my website and read about the characters in Mykela, operatives, and City of the Ancients. My website is www.bymykela.com. That's www.bymykela.com. Leave a comment below on how many bios you've read so far, or let me know who your favorite character is so far. And that's going to be interesting too, because you might like one character and somebody else might like somebody else. Somebody might like Kirsha, and somebody might no, I like Kyrian, or no, I like Kilty. So even if we're talking about City of the Ancients, different people are going to pick different characters that they like or hate or whatever. So somebody may not like Mr. Vollins or Mr. Parsons, when he came over to talk to Kyrian and tell him the way things should be done between married people. Some people might be offended at that character, and they may not like that character. So you can leave that in the comments. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate your participation. If you know someone who would like this video, then please share it with them. This is Mykela with Write with Mykela. Bye for now.